What differentiates criminals from the rest of us? What causes someone to be more prone to violent behavior than someone else? It has been suggested that the likelihood of an individual being violent is greatly dependent on the hereditary, genetic makeup, and biological influences that are out of their control. Chromosomal abnormalities, gender, and varying brain structures are all factors that are believed to contribute to violent behavior. A strong biological link with violence suggests that criminals may not have as much of a decision in their behavior than many would think. It is important to determine the strength of the link between biological factors and violent behavior in order to develop fair policies and methods of treatments for criminals. In order to assess the biological influences on violent behavior, this video will examine the affected parts of the brain and chromosomal similarities in violent people, the extent to which gender plays a role in determining violent behavior, and treatments and surgeries that are available in order to lessen the effect of biological influences.
As well as scientific factors, behaviorists have demonstrated the impact of child's upbringing and social environment on their likelihood of becoming violent when they are grown up. Unstable home environments, socioeconomic status, relationships between parents and children are all factors that have been shown to have a significant impact on a child's development and their traits. This deliberation about the relative impact, biological and environmental influences on violent behavior is a nature versus nurture debate. Because it's unlikely that violent behavior can be fully attributed to one of the two, we will look into how both biological and societal factors have a combined impact on violence. These are some of the main ideas and questions will be addressed on this episode of CSI Guelph.
The portions of the brain that interpret and express emotion are those most affected in violent offenders. Dysfunctions in the limbic and paralimbic regions of the brain are associated with violent behavior. These regions of the brain are necessary for the integration of emotional input into more complex cognitive functions. A decrease in the volume of gray matter in the amygdala is also common amongst violent offenders. The amygdala is important in forming rational responses between environmental cues and the activation of basic threat circuits. Neuroimaging research has shown that reductions in the volume and thickness of gray matter in the prefrontal cortex is a commonality amongst violent offenders. Damage to the prefrontal cortex and/or a reduction in its volume has been shown to cause poor moral judgment and a lack of compassion. This part of the brain is involved in decision-making, monitoring ongoing behavior, and rationalizing responses.
Typically, females are born with 2 X chromosomes and males are born with an X and a Y chromosome. Recently, there has been research into the genotypic influences on violent behavior. This research has stemmed from the finding that a large number of individuals in maximum security prisons and institutions for the mentally ill have chromosomal abnormalities. The main chromosomal abnormality that is being researched and has been associated with violent behavior is the presence of an extra Y chromosome, making males XYY and females XXY. In terms of hormones, high levels of certain neuropeptides such as oxytocin in females and vasopressin in males have a strong influence on social conduct. Neuropeptides cause relaxation and sedation effects and reduces the fearfulness and sensitivity to pain. Low cortisol levels have been observed in aggressive children and also may stimulate violent behavior. High testosterone levels have also been found to be strong preceders of violent behavior.
Although both females and males can be violent, there's a much larger part of the population that has been incarcerated for violent offenses who were males. In general, only 1% adult male population have violent tendencies. 15 to 25% of these are held in North American prisons. Women are better at recognizing emotions and expressing them through facial expression and communication. Men are more likely to show a response to threats and express emotions through actions such as violence and dominance. It is also seen through brain scans that the cerebral networks used differ in men and women following expressions. What do you think, Lynn?
Socioeconomic inequalities, poverty, gang affiliation, and the absence of social networks increases the likelihood of an individual becoming violent. Victims of child abuse have also have an above-average likelihood of becoming violent in their later life. Trauma to a child's social environment, like the loss of a caregiver, may strongly impact the neurobiological mechanisms that influence an individual's perception of threat and their response to stress. This may in turn result in violent behavior. Furthermore, controlled studies suggest that lead-exposed children suffer irreversible brain alterations to make them more likely to commit violent crimes as young adults.
Presence of a criminal gene may influence policy in one of two ways. The predisposition may warrant minimal sentencing because their actions were not completely under the offender's control, or the criminal gene could justify stricter sentences because there will be a presumed tendency for future violence or a criminal to reoffend. The Italian appeals court reduced sentencing by a year because the accused had tested positive for genetic variations that made him particularly prone to acting aggressively under stressful circumstances. This case may set precedent for future criminals possessing the gene. However, this is disputed by the notion that possessing the gene does not mean that they are incapable of repressing their violent tendencies similar to someone without the gene. Although we are products of our genetics and our environment, that doesn't mean we don't still have free will and are able to differentiate between right and wrong.
There's been a noted correlation between the lack of physical sensory pleasure during early stages of development and exhibited aggression in adulthood. An individual's tendency to exhibit violence-seeking or pleasure-seeking behavior is influenced by a neuropsychological predisposition that is formed from sensory experiences like touch during the formative period of development. In regards to maternal rejection, children who were neglected during their first year of life are likely to commit acts of violence by their 18th year. Therefore, skin-to-skin contact strengthens maternal-infant bonding, minimizing the likelihood of rejection.
Different articles have different opinions on whether or not criminals who are genetically predisposed to violent behavior should be treated differently or not. The criminal justice system must acknowledge chromosomal and hormonal variation in offenders. However, it must also use this discovery with caution. Despite evidence that genes have a powerful influence on behavior, the gene is not a completely deterministic force, independent of history or environment. A genetic variation may predispose an individual to aggressive behavior. It cannot cause the individual to commit a violent crime. However, since a certain amount of control remains, violent offenders with genetic or hormonal variation should not be exonerated from their crimes. The more realistic and appropriate future role of evidence of a genetic predisposition towards violence is as a mitigating factor in criminal sentencing. Although a genetic variation may not cause the affected individual to commit acts of violence, the variation may significantly weaken his or her will to resist. In contrast, some scientists suggest that for the purposes of determining responsibility in court and deciding upon sentences, genetic, chromosomal, and hormonal variations should be treated equivalently to environmental influences.
The way we deal with violent offenders needs to be approached from both the scientific and societal perspective, as we need to understand both the factors that may cause a person to exhibit violence, such as genetic predisposition or environmental factors, and the potential societal implications of those factors.